There wasn't a lot, there really wasn't any guidance about the transition. But I think each session has its own uh, Zoom link. So I think if we open, well, this is open now anyway, right?
Yeah.
You don't need a password. I mean, if a participant has gone to the page, they just click on the link. So they're not waiting for me. So we'll start in 3 minutes and just go.
So we won't necessarily see if they're there or not, or
No, there is let's see, it might show up in the participants.
okay.
And I'm guessing you would prefer to answer questions when you finish your presentation, or do you want people to interrupt?
Oh, I'm not picky, whatever is better, I guess. Maybe at the end it's better,
Yeah.
just in case they have questions about things coming up, but
Yeah, same. I don't mind. I don't mind too much either. Just
Yeah, I'm generally in favor of that too, but I'm not sure how that affects the kind of rhythm of a webinar.
mhm.
So maybe
that's true.
I appreciate both of you stepping up to do this.
Yeah, of course.
No worries.
The advantage of recording this is that for people who are not in this time zone, they can watch it later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon. I'm Reed Lipset. I'm the faculty of the School of the Environment at Yale and a longtime and proud member of the International Society for Industrial Ecology. You're tuning into a session of the International Industrial Ecology Day. This session will focus on two papers that won the Graedel Prize for Best Paper in Industrial Ecology. For those that are interested, I'm putting a URL in the chat about where you can get more information about those prizes and how they're awarded. But it is a very careful and scrupulous process to find really good papers. I'm very glad to have the authors of the lead authors of two winning papers. We're going to start with Christy Walker, and I'm going to let her explain who she is and how she got to this and talk about her paper. She'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be some time for question and answer. And then Jerome Lavoie will talk about his paper in the same way. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or if you can also discuss things that are happening while talks are being made. Thanks. Christy?
Hi, everybody. Thank you. As Reed mentioned, my name is Christy. Is this on? Is this working? Okay.
Yeah, you should start the.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So thanks for the invitation to present today for an Industrial Ecology Day. As Reed said, my name is Christy Walker, and I'm a Graedel Prize winner from 2021. A little introduction to me. I'm originally from Scranton, Pennsylvania in the US, but I have been living for 11 years in Switzerland at this point. As many people in Pennsylvania have done, I got my bachelor's in the civil and environmental engineering from Penn State University. It's a big school in the States. And then I worked a bit and then continued to get a master's and then a PhD in environmental engineering at ETH University, which is in Switzerland. My PhD was supervised by Stephanie Helwig in the Ecological Systems Design Group. I think her name resonates through this field quite a lot. And when I started, she just told me the topic of the PhD was environmental impacts and healthfulness of personalized diets, and I could kind of go with it however I wanted, and that's what I did. I've taken a bit of a pivot since the PhD. I've been working on the sustainability team at On. They are a sportswear brand. In case you don't know, they make the funny looking shoes with the clouds on the bottom that are taking over the world, it feels like. But yes, they have a lot of nice sustainability initiatives, so I really enjoy working there. And the why I am here is, as I mentioned before, as part of my PhD, I wrote a paper. It's a mouthful: methodology and optimization tool for a personalized low environmental impact and healthful diet specific to country and season. And this was published in the Journal of Industrial Ecology, and I was nominated and won the Graedel Prize, which was quite an honor. And that is, yeah, I'm just going to talk a little about the paper and how I got to that point today. So a summary of the paper, which I'm just going to call Optimized and Personalized Diets to shorten the title a bit. The goal of the research was to make a tool that people would be able to access online and use to make their own low impact diet that would be optimized for their personal nutrient needs. And this diet would be able to change depending on first preferences, but also season and location. And included in the paper were some case studies just to show how gender, dietary preferences like being vegan or vegetarian, preferring a lot of meat, how the location and season would affect the recommended foods that one should consume for their nutrients for the lowest impact diet. As an overview, the tool would require the person who wants to get this information to put in some personal information such as age, gender, height, weight, and activity levels. And they would have to put this in so that the tool would be able to calculate basically what level of nutrients they would need and how many kilocalories they would need for an optimal diet for them. And they would also need to put in their location. So where would this diet be consumed? So we would be able to see what kind of foods were available in that country and in the season. So the month that the diet would be consumed. Other inputs to the tool, I built a 500 item food database that had basically the nutrient content of all these items, some processed, some raw material or raw foods, the seasonal availability for those foods, so which countries would produce them when, and the impacts associated with those foods. So it included two impacts, greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity impacts. And these would change depending on the country, depending on what kind of processing the food went through, depending on the transport, where it was coming from and where it was going to be consumed, storage, length of storage, whether it was refrigerated, whether it was shelf stable, whether it needed to be deep frozen, and also home cooking impacts. Because I thought, okay, if users really want to know, they want to maybe be able to know whether dried beans are better than already canned beans, or as an example. And the output of this was a user could see, okay, this is my personalized diet for my personal nutrient needs based on my location, based on the season, that would meet all my nutrient needs and would have the lowest possible impact. They used a linear optimization to do really the lowest possible impact diet they could have. Side effect of this is we could see what % of the diet's impacts went towards production, went towards transport, cooking, processing, storage. So it was a really nice breakdown to see where the major impacts were and how they could be disaggregated. This is it's a big slide. I just wanted to kind of show an example of what the output would produce. And I don't know if you can see like my mouse here, but basically these are 3 scenarios that are shown. This first one is what a weekly diet consumed in Switzerland in February would consist of. If you want to hit all your nutrient needs, it would be about these 20 items at these weights. So this many grams of that item in the week, and this is the associated impact with them. Similarly, it was done for Switzerland in August and Spain in August, just to be able to compare what the composition, how the composition would change. And also you can see where it should be produced for the lowest impact. So it shows, where that food is actually grown during those months and based on trade with the different countries and where the lowest impact would be. So what led to this research and this tool? It started with some earlier papers I had written towards the PhD. One of the first papers I wrote was about the impacts of food processing. The second paper was looking at as consumed diets for a cohort in Europe and seeing, what people were having as nutritional quality, what kind of nutrients they were consuming and the environmental impacts with that. The third paper was looking at if people were eating what they were actually recommended to eat. So we have a lot of government bodies and agencies saying, hey, you need to eat this many fruits, this many vegetables, and it's seeing if people were actually meeting those recommendations. And the fourth reason that I thought this tool would be really useful is I felt like there were a lot of questions from consumers who were really trying to reduce their environmental impacts with their diets, but you start asking more questions. Is it better that I have something frozen that was produced in Switzerland and has to be stored, or is it better to import that same product that's in season at a different time, or should my beans be canned or should they be dried? And I think people get lost in these details, and it's overwhelming basically for everybody to be considering all these different aspects. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was a tool that did this for you and made the decisions for you so you don't have to consider this on your own? So that was kind of the impetus for building this. So as I mentioned, the first paper was about food processing impacts, and one of the main takeaways from that paper is there can be a lot of added impacts just at the processing stage. So if we're just looking at potatoes and then they're being processed, it significantly increases the impacts. And I thought this needed to be included when you're looking at diets, especially given how much processed food people are really consuming in their everyday diet. The second paper, as I mentioned, was looking at as consumed diets. This was one of the images or the figures I had in this paper, but main takeaway from here is on this side, these are the best diets. These are consuming all the nutrients and vitamins they are supposed to be consuming in the right quantities. And this is where the average was for the people in Europe. So you see there's a bit of a gap. There's things missing in diets, and it's especially relevant in the vegetarian and vegan cohort. We see that their impacts are lower, but they're definitely missing something that they should be consuming. The third paper, I focused on the global burden of disease, and this is where they recommend how much you're actually supposed to be eating to minimize your disease risk. And you can see a minimum of 250 grams of fruits, 360 grams of vegetables. So they give these minimum amounts for fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, milk. And I looked at the same cohort for this to see whether people were eating this, and the end result is no. People in general were not meeting these recommendations. And this isn't from my study, but another study that was done in the US saying, these are the disease burdens because of the underconsumption of these categories, food categories. So I took basically the results of these four things and said, hey, I think this tool would be really useful. I think it brings a lot to people interested in having low impact diets that also hit all the nutrient needs. So we have the processed foods are included. We see that people aren't meeting the adequate nutrient intakes, especially vegetarians and vegans. We see that people aren't complying with the dietary recommendations. And we see consumers not really knowing what they're supposed to be choosing when they're at the grocery store, basically. The tool and the research started with a very general linear optimization program that showed what people should be eating. So this had the big nutrient database. It had climate change and biodiversity impacts for each of these items, just global values. And it said, hey, let's build a diet that meets dietary recommendations and you get enough vitamins and minerals. And cool, that was fun, it worked. And then I thought, let's go one step further. Let's regionalize these impacts. Let's change them depending on where they're grown and where they're being consumed. Let's not just do a general, you have to meet average nutrient intakes, but let's specify this to include on a personal level. Let's take into account where the diet is consumed, the country it's consumed in, and the trade between countries to see, if that product's even available from other countries where it would be relatively low impact. Let's consider month, because an optimized diet, low impact diet in February in Switzerland might look really different than it would in June in Switzerland, when there's a lot more local products available, for example. And so this tool was developed that people could use, and it is online and it's slow. So it would be nice to have a programmer take a look at it and speed it up if possible. But it takes the guesswork out of building your own low impact and healthful diet, and shows how much impact reduction is possible. So we all know we need to all kind of change our ways of life to hit the Paris targets. And this shows how much reasonably we would be able to do just by changing our diets, because there's pretty significant reductions compared to where we are currently. So the takeaways from this paper were that I found that optimized diets for men and women were similar in countries, and except once you take into food preferences, things change, because men tended to prefer consume much more meat than women did in general. I did find that location of diet consumed and the seasonality does change the suggested fresh fruits and vegetables, which is seems obvious. It doesn't change the other things which aren't linked to seasonality, though. I did find local isn't always better. So for the Swiss diet, I found that almost a little less than 50%, it was actually lower impact to have it imported from nearby countries rather than have it produced in Switzerland itself. And I found that milk makes up a huge impact for the diets. And the reason milk is in these diets is because it's recommended by the Global Burden of Disease to reduce disease risk if you consume a certain amount per day. And that vegetarian and vegan diets do require supplementation if you want them to truly be low impact, because otherwise they just require more food to hit all the required nutrients. Then they need to be very carefully planned. If you want to hit all the recommended nutrients and still have a low impact diet. So some responses I've gotten to this paper. It was published in, I believe it was May 2021. I was contacted by a reporter for an Italian newspaper called La Repubblica about the tool. And this is a screenshot of the article that was printed in this paper. This is a poorly translated Google version of it. The original's in Italian, so it doesn't necessarily flow off the tongue the way it should. And then I was also contacted by a reporter, Ramona Drosner, from the Swiss Radio and Television organization, and she had done also, she had tried to implement the diet in her daily life and kind of talked about the results of it and challenges. So that was nice also. Further work is being done. I do have a master's student now who is working on a follow-up study for this and looking on improving the tool and making it a little more less global and more Swiss-based and updating the code now. She has just started though, so I don't have an update of where that is going yet. And as I said, I'm a bit out of academia now, so it's not something I can push forward on my own unless it digs into my weekends, and I'm not at that point right now. So so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But yeah, that's where things are at. I can't hear you, Reed.
There we go.
Yeah,
that's
much
great.
Better.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Christy about her paper or her work?
Hi, if I may briefly jump in, Barbara here. Yes, first of
Hi.
all, really nice presentation. And I
Thank
have a
you.
very specific, sort of maybe minor question at the beginning when you sort of showed the overview, which food products exactly you looked at, and
Yeah.
fish in terms of the omega-3s.
Yeah.
Why did you pick mackerel and not sardines? Because sardines, they are just as tiny and sort of similar packaging, I would think, but much higher omega-3. Are they
Great
just
question.
people don't like them, or?
No, it has nothing to do with that. So the tool in the beginning actually fluctuated between sardines and mackerel. So I think when it was doing the linear optimization, it always kind of bounced between the two. So a sensitivity analysis would have shown, okay, either one of these fish, they have similar impacts, and yeah, similar nutrient contents basically. But I think the point is those low, high oil fish are the way to go because they're the lowest impact fish and offer, I guess, the biggest bang for your buck nutrient wise. So the results of this are really computer generated results. And I think you can take them with a bit of a grain of salt. Okay, so it's showing mackerel. If you are aware of the benefits of mackerel and prefer sardines or anchovies or whatever, I think that's a personal thing and it won't change the impacts as significantly at all. So
Thank you.
So if you have a question, you can either jump in, unmute yourself, or raise your hand or put something in the chat. While I'm waiting, I have some. Oh,
Reed.
Steve Young. Yeah, please. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi.
hi.
Thanks, Christy. That was great. Very sophisticated. I've heard mixed information on fresh food versus, I'm thinking vegetables, fresh vegetables, fruits versus well-preserved frozen or canned product or freeze-dried product. But I'm wondering where your optimization goes, because I suppose I've seen reference to the fact that people obsess over trying to get the fresh stuff, but that ends up being less nutritious, out of season, and higher impact than just buying a bag of frozen peas.
Yes. And in the optimization, there was always the option of fresh peas, frozen peas, canned peas, and then the nutrition associated with that, and then the impacts of the fresh peas, the frozen peas, the canned peas. And the way it worked, like the optimization would run, and it would, if fresh peas weren't available, then it wouldn't choose them if they were available across the world and it was a low enough impact to justify picking them in addition to the transport compared to frozen peas, which would have the impact of production plus processing and then storage on top of it. Then it would just look at all the different aspects of the supply chain and pick it basically. So whichever one ended up being lowest impact and having adequate amount of like the same or equal amount of nutrients basically. So I think in some
I suppose
cases,
my point is though that the fresh pea season is like 3 weeks or 2 weeks.
right? Yeah, and so
an industrial producer can harvest an entire crop,
yeah,
freeze it. Their food waste is minimal.
yeah.
Their storage and preservation of nutrients is very good.
Yeah.
And it should dominate, but
yeah, in theory, yes, yes, it should. I don't think peas ever, I'm not sure peas ever even showed up in here, because there was always the other preferred foods to that with, but yeah, it should, I mean, the seasonality is taken into account that, hey, these won't be available in these months in these countries. And in that case, it would pick, okay, but frozen peas are available all year round. And I think also it depends, like the processing was linked to the country it would have been processed in. So if we're saying peas were grown in Italy, then it was assumed that they were also processed in Italy and then would be transported to Switzerland or any other country. So, I mean, it's all, in the end, it's taking everything into account. So, but I agree with you. In general, there's a big push for fresh foods, and it's not necessarily like, I don't know if yeah, it's necessarily worth it compared to frozen, because you're right, it's similar. I did find though that, yeah, it also depends on the country it's being consumed in. So when I compared Switzerland and Spain, Switzerland has very low energy costs or very low energy or electricity impacts, because a lot of it is hydropower, whereas Spain had much higher electricity impacts. So then it's taking into account, okay, frozen peas in Switzerland, when you're including storage for half a year, actually have much lower impacts than the same peas that would be stored in Spain in deep freezer. So then you're really, yeah, it's changing depending on so many conditions. So in that case, maybe fresh peas would be preferred there, even though they're out of season, and have to be transported from somewhere else. So it's a lot of variables that, yeah, are a bit linked, so.
Tessa?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question on if you thought about scale up and sort of how your results would change if you were looking at how best to feed a whole country. Like, would some
Yeah.
issues like overfishing like become more prevalent? And yeah, if you had any thoughts on that.
Great question. I didn't think about that. I mean, I did think about it, and then I ran out of time, so I stopped thinking about it. But yeah, I think that's also something that should really be considered, because this is really geared towards just yeah, like really personalized, so an individual can make these decisions. But I think when you're considering, yeah, so many, yeah, okay, not one individual making these decisions, but 6 billion people making these same decisions, and obviously, yeah, yeah, there should be some variability taken into account there, and yeah, availability basically.
Well, I'll ask a question while I'm waiting for other people to raise their hands. This is a very sophisticated tool, much more than some others I've seen on the web. You know, the world is filled with bad carbon footprint tools and similar things. Are you seeing much uptake? Do you have thoughts about how to compete in that very noisy domain to get people to pay attention to such a sophisticated tool?
I'm an engineer, so no. I did spend a lot of time thinking about that. Like I personally felt very proud of this tool and thought it brought a lot, like, to the public. Like this is, I felt like this answered a lot of questions, right? Bringing it to a wider audience and competing with other really great tools that are maybe less complicated, right? I think it really depends who your target audience is, and this is for people who maybe already know a lot about environmental impacts and can make some educated decisions. Whereas, yeah, maybe for the wider public, I thought about this a lot, like, because we often hear like, just stop eating red meat, and that's, I mean, this tool is saying, okay, well, if you you want to reduce your impact by, you know, half a kilogram CO2 equivalent, do this instead of that. Whereas the real money is coming after, well, just stop eating red meat, and you already reduce it by orders of magnitude. So I think, like, we're talking to the larger audience, then yeah, you stick with that talking point. And as you get deeper into the details and the people more interested, then you can get, yeah, maybe that's the target audience for this more so. But yeah, it would be nice to be yeah, out there. So
Well, maybe then it's not a matter of having something that's public facing, but more, you know, the dietary world or the nutritional world.
possibly, yeah, where they can interact with it, yeah, and that's true.
Questions from other folks about this? I'll ask one more. So how should the user think about uncertainty?
Yeah. So there is something that I've been wanting to add to it. So yes, it's not including uncertainty. And obviously when it's like a computer algorithm like that, I think it really like hones down on just the numbers. But I thought it could be useful to, given the lack of data and uncertainty quantified in it, to provide, okay, we have this diet, it's suggesting this. I thought maybe it could be nice to have an added feature of like, okay, so if you don't want to consume this, here are some other relatively low impact replacements that you might want to consider, which won't ultimately hugely affect the end footprint, but will offer the same nutritional benefits and have similar impact. So I thought that could be like the next step for it, basically, to make it less rigid and a little more user friendly in case they can't find a particular food or something's not to their liking or something like that. And then it eliminates a bit the uncertainty in it. So
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's turn now to another Graedel Prize winner, Jerome Lavoie. I hope I pronounced his name right. Jerome, can you?
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen in a few seconds. I guess you should be able to see my presentation now.
Yes.
All good. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am Jérôme Lavoie. I am a research support agent at CIREG in Montreal. I was born in the province of Quebec in Canada. And I've been at CIREG first as a master student, then as a PhD, and now as an employee. Important note here, I didn't finish the PhD. And the paper I'm going to be talking about today is actually the first paper I ever published, and the one that granted me this Graedel Prize for junior researcher in 2022. And I published this paper actually with my colleagues Anne-Marie Boulet and Cécile Bull, which are both also members of the CIREG. CIREG is a research center affiliated with 2 universities in Montreal, but also now 2 universities in Switzerland. And we do a lot of LCA stuff and sustainability metrics, development, and these kind of things. So let's jump right into it. So just a small short plan of my presentation today. I'm going to be briefly introducing how the project came to be. Then I'll be talking briefly about the paper in question here and what have been the recent developments that have been carried after the publication of this paper. So how it came to be, well, here's the paper that won the prize. And I put here a little person, the little confused person, because at the time when I was a bit confused about my life, looking into what I could do with my life. And I decided to go back to school. So I went back to school around 30 years old, when I was around 30 years old. And I actually got hired to do a master project at CIREG, focusing on the development of an effect factor for the quantification of the impact of micro and nanoplastics and life cycle assessment. So I was quite lucky to be able to collaborate with my colleagues Anne-Marie Boulet and Cécile Bull, who were actually both my supervisors at the time. So this project actually came to be after the creation of what we call the Marielka Working Group, which is a working group that was initiated to tackle the issue of marine plastic litter in life cycle assessment, because life cycle assessment did not consider at the time the impacts that may be generated by the leaking plastics from our product system. So this working group was created in 2018, which is about the time where I started my master project. And I was actually the first student that was introduced in this working group. So this working group had as an objective to coordinate and harmonize the research efforts among organizations around the globe. And its goal, of course, was to integrate the impacts of marine litter, especially plastic, into ISIE. So 3 professors were leading this working group, supported by the Life Cycle Initiative and the Forum for Sustainability through Life Cycle Innovation, the FSLCI. So Professor Anne-Marie Boulet from CIREG, Prof. Ian Vasquez-Rowe, and Professor Francesca Veronese at NTNU. And my research was targeted into this global international working group. And I was actually ended with the task to specifically develop an effect factor to represent the what we call the physical effects on biota that plastic pieces can have, so that we can model these in our life cycle assessment life cycle impact assessment methodology. Sorry. So what you see here is actually the framework that was published as the first deliverable of the America Working Group, and my work was really to focus on a specific task, which was the generation of the effect factor, which is part of the characterization factor that we use to represent the impact of certain substances in life cycle impact assessment. So just a brief overview of how the research project was carried. So overview of the methodology here. So first, I had to actually extract some data from the scientific literature, extract data about the ecotoxicity of micro and nanoplastics, so that we were able to generate this effect factor. So that's what I did in the first part of the project. And then I had to play with the data a bit to come up with the EC50s, which are the concentrations at which 50% of the individuals of a species are begin to show signs of affection after being exposed to a pollutant. Sorry. So these EC50s is what we needed. So I had to work also with other effect metrics that we have in Ecotox, which can be low X and no X. And so I played around with data to get what we wanted. I had to also classify my data according to which size of polymers were used, which polymer types, so polystyrene, polyethylene, these kind of things, and also the different shapes of microplastics that can be represented in the plastics that we find in the environment and that are used in experimental studies. So shapes like spherical microbeads or fragments or fibers, microfibers from textiles, for example. So these kind of things. So I had to play around with the data a bit. And then also I conducted some statistical analysis on the EC50s that we calculated to see if it was worthwhile to generate many effect factors for the different subgroups that we had represented in our data. So that's it for the data analysis part. And then, of course, I calculated the effect factors and I proceeded to an analysis of our results. So what we had actually, what I can briefly show you as a result, which are figures that are shown in the paper, are the species sensitivity distribution that show how the different species are sensitive to being exposed to micro and nanoplastics. So on the left here, actually, you can see one subgroup that we have within our data. That was the best subgroup, for which we don't use any extrapolations to get to the EC50s. So in this curve, only EC50s that were directly taken from the literature are used. And in the other graph that you can see on the right, that's using all the bunch of the data that we had for many more species, but in there's a lot of extrapolation. So lots of acute data, and we want to have chronic usually, but also lots of data that are not EC50s, but low X and no X, for example. So lots of extrapolations, more uncertainty in this right graph here. But of course, a lot more species that are represented in there. So with this, I was able to calculate the HC50, which is what allows us to calculate the effect factor directly after that. And then, as I was saying, we computed a simple statistical analysis on the C50s of the different subgroups to see if there was a difference in the toxicity of the different shapes or sizes of or polymer types within our data. And what we found was that with the data that we had, no significant difference could be found among the different subgroups. At least using a single species, which is Daphnia magna, the species for which we have a lot of data in Ecotox. But when we were merging all the data together, using all the species that we had in there, we could see minor significant difference for polymer types, but still we considered that there was too much noise around the data, too much uncertainty about this. So we still pointed to the fact that maybe at this point, a single generic effect factor would be appropriate for now, since lots of uncertainty is present in the data that we had at the time. Yeah. So these are the effect factors that we came up with. Also, what you can see in there actually are the different subgroups that we had on the x-axis here. So all the data combined, the best effect factor that we have, and also the different subgroups that we had in there. So microplastics, NP is nanoplastics, and the different polymers. So what you can see here actually is that the uncertainty is once again really, really high, and that these effect factors could be all considered pretty much equal. So with this in mind and the statistical analysis that I showed previously, we once again pointed to the fact that maybe a single effect factor would be appropriate for now. So that's pretty much the conclusions that we got with our study. So we provided this effect factor that would allow us to generate the characterization factor maybe later on. And that would allow the LCAs actually to better account for the impact of plastic litter in our sustainability assessments, right? And then after that, of course, as work kept going through the America working group, but also at CIREG, we had many more grad students that worked on the topic. So we were able to produce the first update of the effect factors that I had in 2022 with the help of an intern, because we knew at the time that a lot of data was coming out on a yearly basis, since it's kind of a hot topic right now, micro and nanoplastics in the marine environment. So lots of experimental studies are testing the toxicity of these pollutants. So we were able to gather more data in this first update, so come up with a more robust effect factor. So that was a first thing. And then in 2023 also, we proceeded to another update of the effect factor, because new recommendations from the life cycle community came out and changed a bit the way in which the effect factor would be generated from now on. So we proceeded to a second update at this time also. And this update was actually included in a publication that we published with the help of a postdoc that was at CIREG at the time, Elena Correa Puertas, her work was also part of the America working group, and she used the effect factors that I generated in my paper in 2022 to develop the whole model, the whole model, to compute the complete characterization factors. So that's what we did in this paper. So completing my effect factors with a fate model that considers degradation and sedimentation of micro and nanoplastics, we were able to come up with the characterization factors. So we made these characterization factors available for midpoint and endpoint indicators, and for two sets of units, one that can fit in the units that are used in the Impact Well Plus methodology that is developed at CIREG, and also in the GLAM initiative, which is kind of a consensus building and recommendations that we have within the life cycle assessment community. So our factors are recommended by the GLAM and it will be communicated soon within this initiative, but the characterization factors are already available on the America website and in the Impact Well Plus methodology. So we also were able after that to perform a few case studies to test our characterization factors. So I will just briefly show you the results of these case studies that we have that are able to show how the impacts of micro and nanoplastics can compare to other impact indicators that we have in life cycle assessment, like climate change and these kind of other environmental issues. So just briefly before that, a first figure where we show the characterization factors that we developed. So here you can see the different polymers for which we developed characterization factors, sorry. So these CFs are for microplastic emission in the marine environment, and they are provided for 3 shapes. So you can see here the different colors in the figure represent the shape of the microplastic emitted. 3 shapes, 5 sizes, and 11 polymers. So what you can see in there actually just briefly is that the low density polymers, the ones that are at the bottom of the graph, like EPS and polypropylene, show quite a large impact because they stay for a longer period in the water column, whereas the high density polymers, they sediment quickly, so they accumulate in the sediments and they don't have any lasting impact in the water column. So for now, what we were able to measure only accounts for the impact that is happening within the water column and not in the sediments. And that is work that we are tackling at the moment, actually including this, the effects that can happen in the sediment as well. So I'll go quickly over this. This is just a brief overview of the characterization factors that we developed. And these are the results that we had for the case studies that we conducted with these new indicators. So what we can see here is when compared with, in a case study, sorry, that is about reusable crates for vegetable and fruit transport. We can see in the graph that the two plastic crates made from polypropylene and high density polyethylene show that the impact of microplastics in the marine environment are actually quite negligible compared to other impacts that we have in life cycle assessment. And just a bit of another result that we had is quite different this time with another polymer type. So this time for single-use food trays in to-go meals, we can see in the figure here that we compare these food trays for 3 types of products. So one made with bagasse, one with wood pulp, and one from EPS, which is expanded polystyrene. And we can see here that the impacts from micro and nanoplastics can be quite important because this EPS is a low density polymers that actually accumulates for a long period in the water column, and that is able to generate quite an important impact. So we show here that it's quite important to include this new impact category in our assessments because for certain products made of low density polymers, it can be quite important. And the next steps, well, we have a lot of things going on in the America working group still. So lots of new project tackling the case of additives, because in our project, we don't actually quantify the impacts that additives that are within the plastic products can have. We deal with virgin polymers only for now. And also, as I was saying earlier, a project is actually tackling the case of what happens once the microplastics accumulate in the sediments, because as we saw earlier, for high density polymers, they tend to sediment quickly and to accumulate there, and they can generate an impact on biodiversity that is there also. So this is a project that is being carried at the moment. Also, we have projects dealing with the impacts on human health in life cycle assessment and these kind of things. Also, the potential of microplastic to act as vectors for other pollutants. This is also being tackled within the America Working Group, and invasive species that can be transported on the macroplastic pieces in the marine environment is also being done. So lots of new project going on, and quite exciting topic at the moment, of course. So that's what I had for you today. Merci, thank you. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
No questions? Well, I'll ask one, Jerome. So,
Yeah.
do you feel that you are now getting a feel for the relative significance of marine plastics as an environmental threat, or is it too early to be thinking in those terms?
Sorry, I didn't hear properly the beginning of the question, but
sorry,
can you repeat
I
that?
said, has your work in this area given you a feel for the relative threat of marine plastics, or is it still too early in the research to have a sense of that?
Well, yes, I think we are starting to see a glimpse of what it could look like. At the beginning, we were expecting impacts to be quite lower than other types of impacts, like impacts from climate change and these kind of things. But as I showed in the case studies that we have held for the moment, for low density polymers, we actually see impacts that are quite important. So I think they can be, they have to be considered definitely. And that is only accounting for the impacts that are happening within the water column, as I was saying. So in the sediments, other impacts can also occur. And we have results already that came out from a student that is working with us. And we might see actually important impacts in the sediments as well from microplastics that are accumulating there and that affect the biodiversity that is there. So I think it's quite surprising, but maybe we'll see more impact that we were expecting at first. And it's definitely not as negligible as we thought it would in the beginning, especially with the amounts of plastic that are leaking from our economy these days. So in low-income countries, what we see is that leakage rates are really important because the waste management infrastructures are sometimes lacking. So in these cases, for plastic products, the leakage rate is quite high. So impacts can actually be influenced by that as well. And they will be quite great in this case. Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries.
It's I think, interesting and important question because in some cases there is a trade-off between the relatively low carbon footprint of some uses of plastic,
exactly. Yeah.
Compared to other materials, and then this unclear impact of the littered plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Reed, Steve Young here. I can always ask another question.
Good.
Thank you. Yeah, no, excellent. That I love the two things. One is that you're trying to consolidate a huge scientific literature where there's empirical work. And secondly, you've considered density. And to me, so much of the literature on plastics and microplastics in the environment has ignored density. I've had a student just complete a microplastics inventory for Canada, and more than half of the release that we see is tire wear particles, which are quite dense and would be very localized. So you talk about the potential for sediment. That sediment's going to be, contained on the side of roads for the most part. And that type of plastic is very different. I'm lecturing. I shouldn't be lecturing. I should be asking a question. So, but also when you look at the amount of microplastics released, it's approximately 2% of the value of industrial chemical emissions in Canada, which include things like benzene and glycol which is emitted in great quantities directly into the environment. So I'm wondering if you can use your method to compare microplastic as a contaminant versus other contaminants that we should be concerned about.
Yes, definitely. In the life cycle assessment methodology, we definitely consider other pollutants that are emitted in the environment, and we use the same metrics to be able to compare them with each other. So definitely this is taken into account. And I agree with you that a lot of attention is given to plastics at this time, but we also have, of course, many other substances that are going under the radar and for which we should be worried about, definitely.
That are less sexy.
Yeah, yeah,
so.
definitely. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Cheryl.
No worries.
Other questions? Jerome, will you be coming back to some of this work, do you think?
Yes, I'm actually, we keep working on it. We have students working with our effect factors with the method that I used, that I kind of developed, because it hadn't been done for plastics at the time. So we have students that are working for the sediments project that I talked about. So I'm actually always into it pretty much. I spend half of my working hours working on the topic of plastics. So we are still upgrading the methodology and updating everything that we've done continuously as new data is coming out and new projects are starting and everything that's going on. Through the America working group, we have a lot going on, and the whole framework that I showed in the beginning is being tackled by different parts of the scientific community. So yeah, I'll be going back to it, definitely.
That's great. Do you see the work also addressing some of the questions like Steve's about issues of relative threat and how much attention we should be paying to different parts of these issues?
Well, I must admit that we are, of course, focused on plastics a lot these days, but of course, in the field of LCA, we always have other impact categories in mind, right? So the ecotox impact category is always there. So in life cycle assessment, that's why this method is so used and so popular these days, is we are able to compare how impacts from this environmental issue compares with other environmental issues like from other pollutants or from climate change or these kind of things. So we do always have these kind of things in the back of our head.
This is Nick Gordon. Can I ask a question as well?
Yes, please. Definitely.
So I'm wondering actually a little bit of perhaps relating your work and what Christy talked about. So do you have a sense of if your work can inform whether, for example, the plastics pollution has a particular impact that might impact what we would choose to eat? For example, Christy talked about the sardines and the mackerel and so on. Or do you know, are those particularly susceptible to plastic pollutants in terms of making them less desirable to eat as a result of the impact?
Well, yeah, definitely food is related to plastic packaging a lot, because a lot of what we do with plastic is food packaging, and that's what we conduct the case studies that we did on food packaging specifically. And for the case of fishing, well, what we actually see in the field is that a lot of plastic is emitted by the fishing industry, sadly, with the nets that are lost at sea and these kind of things. So of course, access to data on the quantity of plastic gear that is lost at sea is really an issue, but this can definitely interact with the way Christy was talking about the environmental performance of certain food. products, and especially for how they're packaged, but also how they are produced or fished for the case of fish. So yes, I think there's lots of links to be made here, and that including these new indicators can definitely provide an even more comprehensive overview of how the impacts of certain food can compare to each other.
Thank you.
No worries. Reed, we can't hear you. You're muted then.
Thank you. So Christy, are you going to incorporate that into the next version of your model?
Of course, yes.
Any other questions from people? Well, in the void, I will ask one more. Do you see is there other research in the literature that is focusing on these questions of relative threat or relative importance of plastic pollution?
Yes, it's kind of hard to say, but I would say there's other groups than the one that we have at CIREG and within America that are also interested in adding these indicators into the life cycle assessment methodology. So there is interest in this sense in comparing these impacts with other types of impacts from other environmental issues. But other than within the life cycle assessment community, I don't really see it.
Okay. We know that the plastics industry has been touting the relative low carbon footprint of plastics packaging. But I was just wondering if the research and discourse had gone beyond that. Well, thanks to both Christy and Jerome. Good papers and good presentations, quite interesting. And thanks for the time and the preparation. And I hope you'll tune into. Go ahead, Christy.
I was just going to say thank you for the invitation and the award.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, have a good afternoon, and I hope you'll tune into some of the other sessions. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.